Hommage Ekti in Sikason, Margaret Cardinal, on itse puhuni ohtenia. Miko peusihtajan se makuma, evaja eksna magia min kisniho ke usihta kukipokkikoi. My name is Okimasko, meaning the boss lady. Ekti is over there. In Sioux, it means she rides her horse along the ridge. And in Norwegian, it means the true one. Margaret Cardinal. I'm originally from Saddle Lake. I'm a teepee maker and as well as a teacher of the teepee teachings and as well as doing traditional arts. I grew up in Saddle Lake. And basically Cree was my first language. And I grew up, helping my mother and my grandmother harvest fish that came up the creek, and watching my grandmother pulling the fish, lifting up her skirts and straddling the brook and catching the fish and throwing them on the ground. And us little kids would go around collecting the waddling fish on the ground, hauling them to my mother and aunt, who would then prepare them for smoking and harvesting them. So that's how I grew up then, before boys' school. I was 5 years old, 1959. Basically, I just don't remember whether my parents ever told us we were going. I think they saved that. I just remember having to take, because I'm in the days of horse and wagon days. Even though there were vehicles around, but my parents didn't, especially my father, he didn't believe in using vehicles. So everything, we always walked everywhere, or we always had horses. I grew up with horses and wagons. So off we go to the local church, and church happened. But I think after that, it was, I didn't really know what was going on. There's so many people everywhere. The strangest part is that there was a grain truck there. I don't know whether it was it was a big truck with rails and a canopy on top. And what they were doing were collecting children. And I was one of them to be put in one of those trucks with the canopy and then hauled off, not knowing where it was going. It was just, I didn't realize I wouldn't see my parents after that for a long time. So that's kind of how I ended up leaving the reserve. And when we eventually, because we were all crowded in there, lots of kids was standing room only in the truck, the back of the truck. Never being in a truck like before, We ended up what is now known as Blue Quills, and I didn't know. It was amazing to me to see such a huge building, but I didn't really see the building until we got off the truck, and then we were herded into what I thought was a cave, because once you walked into the doors, it was dark, you couldn't see. And so I remember it as a cave. As it turns out, it was just a big gym, and it only had windows on the top, on the walls on the top. And I guess I could say that we were herded around like cattle, basically, and sorted out in sizes and male, female, It was kind of chaos. But I think the most frightening part was to see these aliens come out of different doors. And it looked like they didn't have any feet, but they just hovered around everywhere making demands and sorting us out and whatever. And it turns out that they were actually I think they're called the Grey Nuns. They're dressed in brown and black. They had you could only see their faces like this, They had this kind of hat thing, and very scary, very scary. When I entered school, I didn't speak a word of English. I was totally free. As it turned out, I was the youngest of all the little girls that were there, and I was number 44 is the number they gave me, and I was number 44 the rest of the time. And when they sorted us out, I remember being in line and watching all the girls, and when they called my name, Margaret Cardinal, I didn't know who Margaret Cardinal was. And my older cousin, she pushed me. She said, "Kianma, it's you." And I said, "Ma, boo." I said, "That's not my name, you know." And she said, "When you're here, that's going to be your name." And so eventually from there, I got to be number 44. That's, I guess, so I don't like to use the word, I don't like being called Margaret as much anymore because of the years that I spent there. I spent approximately 10 years in boarding school. And yeah, that was my first day at school. Well, the first time I got into school. I had to learn English. It was, ironic part is we were not allowed to speak our language. And yet the nuns there spoke French, you know. It was, when you were a young girl coming into boarding school, you were assigned to a bigger girl who was there before, so they could show you the ropes of the boarding school. And yeah, basically also that, I don't know what they used to call them, monitors, or your helpers should help you try to speak English and understand what the lay or the nuns were saying to you. Yeah. You get up in the morning, you get on your knees and pray. You made your bed, your tiny little bed, because you're one of 40 little beds up in a dormitory. And then, depending on the day and depending on the season, you got ready to go to Mass in the morning, and you went to church, and there was a full Mass in the morning before breakfast. Then you come back to your room and change, and got ready to go downstairs for breakfast. And you prayed before you ate, you prayed after you ate. Then you went to your home room and you prayed there. And you did your chores. You lined up to go to classes. Classes started. You prayed before you got going. You prayed just before lunch. We go downstairs to the big hall, and you prayed before you ate. You prayed after you ate. You prayed before you went to school. You prayed after school. And depending again on the seasons, you either the only time you got to play was give or take half an hour to an hour between after school and supper. But if you were a big girl, you had to work. There was always work to be done. Always, everybody had a job. It didn't matter whether you were just a 5-year-old. Everybody had to do something. I've done slicing bread, which was a nice job because you can always sneak bread out to give to the other students. Sweeping, but my job mostly in all those 9 years was in a scullery, only because that was my punishment. Because I spoke a lot of Cree. I was very stubborn. I didn't want to lose my language because I would have lost touch with my brother. I have a disabled brother who didn't speak any English, and my dad. But I did pay dearly for that because I spent a lot of time against the wall or in the corner. But I was tough enough to know that if they can torture me this way by books or just in the wall, they're not going to get here. And here, I thought of my grandfather, my grandmother, who would tell me stories in Cree, and I would repeat those stories in my head. I would talk to myself and I'd say, I'd tell myself a story in Cree, and I would say, like for instance, and then I would continue making up these stories in my head because I'm saying it all in Cree. Yeah. So the other place I spent a lot of time was in the chapel. Because the nuns drilled into me that since I was disabled, I had polio when I was about 4 or 5, that I had to go and pray for my forgiveness because there was a reason why I was inflicted with this polio on my foot. And so I spent sometimes 3 to 4, maybe even 5 hours in a chapel, and basically just sat in those wooden chairs, and sometimes I would walk from chair to chair, or I would look at all the artwork, because there was some artwork that Mr. Janvier had done, and I remember those paintings well. And I remember times sitting there praying so hard and wondering why my prayers weren't answered. Why can't my foot be normal? Because not only was I being punished for speaking my language, but being punished because I was disabled. And the other place that I spent a lot of time was in the stairwell, under the window. And basically, my entertainment was watching kids outside in a skating rink or playing outside, just again because I either was speaking my language or I wasn't fit enough to be able to be outside. Yeah. After working so long in a scullery, you got to know the nun that worked there. She was dressed totally in white. I think she was a baker, but mostly she looked after organizing the scullery part of that kitchen area. And she was so nice. And I got to know how the system worked, using the machine to sterilize all the dishes and organizing them. And it got to be so easy that there were times where we just spent it with the nun. We would help her put food away in the pantry, and that's when we would be able to eat dates, raisins, and she was so nice. That's the happy part. That's why I didn't mind being sent, because every time I got into trouble, I always crossed my finger and I'd say, I hope I go to scullery. I hope I go to scullery. I don't want to be sitting in a chapel. I don't want to be in a stairwell, or I don't want to be outside.